Well, happy Wednesday, everybody.
Happy Wednesday.
Glad you could come. My name is Neil Frink Jr. You may notice my dad spelled his name with an A, I spelled mine with an I. When I was young, we had a disagreement, so I said N-E-I-L rather than N-E-A-L. But Neil Frink Sr. was born in Brunswick County, North Carolina. Ash, Calabash, and other little surrounding, just above Myrtle Beach. Now I know you'll laugh when I say this because everybody do.
Shalom.
He was Charlotte, you got it. But he was, excuse me, he was the second oldest of 26 children.
Whoa.
16 by his dad's first wife and 10 by his second wife. He told me he was born February the 10th, 1900. He said he came to Fernandina in 1916. He said he got tired of picking cotton and he wasn't cropping no more tobacco. So he caught a ride to Fernandina and he worked domestically, I think, chauffeuring people around. Back then. He didn't need a license, but he worked for some of the people and he got into poker fishing. I don't know exactly when, but he became a captain back in the early 40s. Now I myself, I went to Peck High School. And excuse my hat, but I keep it on because of one reason. Everybody know baseball, know 42. You will not see 42 no more in baseball after Jackie Robinson and after the pitcher for the New York Yankees that retired, the pitcher. I forget his name. Anyway, I can take it off now because I did learn some manners at Peck High School. But anyway, my dad became a captain back in the 40s. And this is the Pogy boat here, and that's, I don't know the name of it. If you can see it there. My eyesight is not.
Mary Mason?
I guess I'm in the way to sit down. But anyway, Pogy boats, and Jim corrected me on this. I thought it carried a crew of about 30 men. He said 26. That was back in the day. And they had naturally the cook, and they had the bus boy who helped the cook, and you had an engineer, you had the pilot, and my dad was a captain long before they required you to have licenses. The Coast Guard didn't require a license, I think, until 1965 or 66. Am I correct on that? And
Maybe a little later.
Maybe a little bit later, but I have a copy of his license here, and he was quite a guy, and then I never fished myself, but I went on a boat several times to watch them when they were fishing. The big boat, which they call a mothership, can you see that up there? And they had two purse boats. The purse boats carried the nets. The mothership on the back would lift the purse boats until they got into the area where the fish were. And I guess the fish net was maybe 100 yards or so long. I'm not sure. Jim, how long was it?
It's about a quarter of a mile.
About a quarter mile. And they had a striker boat who was in a little rowboat, wasn't much bigger than this table. And when they saw the school of fish, the striker boat, he was the first one to leave the mothership, and he'd be in the middle of the fish. The fish would be flickering at the top. And I think that's what they call it, a striker boat. And then when the purse boats would surround them, come together, as if we were a school of fish in here, and the two purse boats would stretch the net around us, and then they would begin to pull the nets in. And they had all types of work songs, just like the men on the railroad sang work songs, they did too. I remember parts of some of them, Little Liza Jane, and one called Little Eva, and sometimes you'd be out on the ocean, and the ocean be like a sheet of glass. And the guys, religion played a lot in the lives of a lot of the men, and they would holler out, Captain Neil, some would call him Captain Smokey, because he smoked cigars, and in the wheelhouse, if be somebody smoked sometime, the pilot would walk out of the wheelhouse and he's steering the boat to get some fresh air. But and so once they stopped pulling the fish in, any member of the crew would holler out what work song they would like to hear. And he was a good singer, I have to admit that, he could sing. And sometime Little Liza Jane, they would call each name, I got a gal in Fernandina, Little Liza Jane, ooh, and they pulled the net. There was a church song that I remember part of. I got it written down here somewhere. Excuse me for a moment. Oh my, I can't even find it. But anyway, some of the church songs that say, Captain Neal, take us to church. And he would holler back, boys, we got him. And they could tell by the strength of the net and the way the fish were fighting, if it was 20,000 in the net, if it was 100,000, sometimes be 200,000. The boats normally at that time would carry, I'm gonna say 350, 400,000 fish. Sometimes they would have more fish in the net that they can carry and they have to call for another boat to come help them. So that's, and they would sing these work songs. I got a gal in Georgia, ooh, ooh, and they'd sing these songs. Little eyes of Jane, ooh, ooh, and pull the net. And that helped them work and got along. And a lot of these guys were very nice gentlemen. Some from as far north as Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, and they were a bunch of great guys. I got to meet a few of them by being on the boat, and if I went out with them and they had a bad day, they say I was bad luck. But he not only, a lot of guys loved to fish with him because of his personality, because he could sing, and he just had the personality that everybody liked. And he would go around in the morning, because a lot of the black guys back in the day didn't have cars or trucks to come to the boat, because they would leave 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. If they saw fish down there in St. Augustine the day before, they were going there the next day, or up at Savannah. I think there's a place up there they call Frying Pan Shows or something. I heard that they had nicknames for places that's not really on the map. But anyway, they would sleep. Some sleep on the boat and some didn't. And so he would gather the men that didn't have cars and bring them to the boat in the morning at 2 or 3 o'clock. They know they had to be there at daybreak, so they had a certain time to leave. And I'll never forget, a former mayor, Sapp, had an uncle. He was a bookkeeper for one of the plants. Ted, yeah, and he met me a few years ago, and he couldn't stop talking. He said when they were up in North Carolina in Beaufort, Beaufort was a big plant. The Smith owned the plant up there. And when they were in Beaufort, he said he went to Captain Neal because knew Captain Neal, being a black captain, they didn't give him the best boat, nor the fastest boat. So Captain Sapp told me, he said, but your daddy, being a wise man, he said, thank you, Captain Sapp. He said, the guys with the fast boat, he said, they can beat my boat, but they can't beat my time. So he would leave an hour before them to get there. I was glad to meet Mr. Hugh Stone long before he had a fuel plant down on where they buy gas at, and he was very fond of my dad and how he handled men. And he would tell me stories about going up the intercoastal waterway. When you get to certain docks in certain areas, the dock master, being white, didn't allow a black captain to dock there. If they needed water supplies or somebody had to go to a doctor, you was not allowed to do that. So my dad stuttered when he talked. When I was younger, I stuttered. So I grew out of it. But I think sometimes he used that as a crutch to get over on people. And he didn't have to. He said, he'd tell the guys, they'd pull into the dock, and the guy said, you can't tie up here. And he pretended he couldn't hear the dock master. So he'd jump off the boat, and the dock master will tell him, you can't dock here. My dad would be hollering back at the dock master, and the dock master say, well, why are you hollering? Why are you hollering? He said, I can't help it. He said, I was born near a junkyard. And he would get his way with a lot of things by playing that. But getting back to the Porgies is a part of the Menhaden family. They had Porgies, shad, moss bunkers. Were there any bunkers?
Well, some people call them herring.
Yeah, herring. Yeah. But they were in Siemens, though, from my memory, the Porgies down here were smaller than the ones in the northern states, like New York, New Jersey. They were much larger up there, from what I understand, because the guys up there used to leave here and they go up there and they spend, I don't know, during the season. They would leave here. They go to Pascagoula, Mississippi, Lake Charles, Louisiana, Port Arthur, Texas, and Moss Point, Mississippi. They had plants all over. Excuse me. I don't know of any plants on the East Coast now. There's possibly one in Reedsville, Virginia.
That's the only one.
And that's up to Chesapeake Bay, Reedsville, Virginia. But down in the Gulf of Mexico, I don't know if there's any.
There's a bunch of them in Louisiana.
In Louisiana, okay. And Mr. Corbett here, Jim, my friend, my church member, and my good buddy. His dad had the plant there, and I met his dad when I was a real young kid, 16. And at the very end of that little peninsula there, Quinn was there, and at the very first plant was Smith's. Now Smith was all over the country and in South America. I had a cousin that Smith, they took a liking to, Philip Mosley. He was in 11th grade at Peck High School, and he worked at the plant part-time. Everybody worked at the poultry plant, and they caught a lot of fish. And they took a liking to Philip, and they took him out of school and taught him the business, and he opened a plant in Peru where they use anchovies. And the boats down there, they said, was not much larger than a shrimp boat. Shrimp boat is, what, 2/3 the size of a pogie boat, I think. And he said the biggest, he was down there for 10 years. And he said the biggest problem they had when they caught the anchovies was keeping the walrus from taking them off the boat. They would fight them off the boat. But the porgy fishing industry was paid good money back then. I didn't realize that as a kid. I myself never fished, but the men that fished, when they caught fish, they were paid well. When they didn't catch any fish, the plant owners, managers would give them a stipend for the week. They got paid every 2 weeks. Jim can tell you more of that than I can. But when they were bailing the fish, we say bailing the fish. When they circled a school of fish, back then they had like a big dipper. And they had a net, a gathering. And when the mothership would come to the two purse boats, they would tie and lock in, and then the boom from the mast of the mothership would lower the Big Dipper into the water, and a guy would be guiding the handle of it, and another guy had the net, and they bring it over the ship, and he would release it. Later on, they advanced. They had the big suctions, and they would suck them out of the net. The water go out one side, and the fish would fall into the hole. But that was quite an industry. It was a lot of hard work, and guys traveled with the season. I know many days my dad went to Louisiana, and actually he died in '94. But he really worked not as a captain but as a pilot until he was in his 80s, because the captains down in Louisiana knew him and liked him so well. They asked him just to come down because the men like him, and just to pilot the boat. They would do the fishing, he piloted the boat, and for him to sing the wonderful songs that they sang, the work songs. And he did that till he was about 85 years old. And then he had to give it up. But going back a little further, the porgy fishing, before they had there was a piper plane that would go out the day before, early that morning, and they see the different schools of fish, large schools, big schools. And a lot of the boats wasn't a part of the ownership of the piper plane. And so they would race to get to the biggest school of fish. The guy with the plane, he would tip the wing to the biggest school of fish, and boats would go there. And it was a funny thing. Jim is more modern than what I am, because I'm a couple of weeks older than him.
Whole lot longer than that now.
But I experienced such a wonderful experience there. They would catch a lot of what we call eating fish. They would catch whiting, bluefish, Spanish mackerel, even sharks. Sharks are nothing to catch, easy, but I never saw them catch a porpoise. And they hated when a porpoise got into the net in the school. Every ship, every porgy boat that I knew carried a .22 rifle. When that porpoise would be in the net and they gathered the net in, that porpoise couldn't find his way out of the net. He would circle, and after a while he would jump. I don't know how high, but when he'd come back down, that net was blown open. I've never, no one say they ever caught a porpoise, and so they would have to shoot him when they caught him in the net. They didn't like to do that, but they did. And if one would break it open, the dead fish would wash ashore, Fernandina, Jacksonville, St. Augustine, and the plant had to send men down to clean the beaches. And that's a part of the experience of porgy fishing. And I knew a lot of good guys, and one guy especially, I never knew his real name, but he was from Jacksonville, North Carolina, and we all called him Jacksonville. He was a learned person, because when you talked to him and he wasn't drinking, you could learn a lot. and the boats tied up all along the front here, but they tied up mainly up there at Calhoun Street, off of 2nd Street, because the fuel dock was there. Gulf, was that Gulf? Texaco. Anyway, Houston family owned that, and the club there, which is the Wicked Bayou, and I was called, back then it was called the Paradise at first, and then it became the Club 440. And when the baseball players were training here in the mid-50s and on, they called it the Dirty 30. But anyway, the gentleman I'm speaking of, because it's sort of comical, they would stay in the club till they closed and time to get on the boat. And in Jacksonville, he'd be out there playing baseball, and my dad would coax him, "Come on, Mr. Jackson, we gotta go, we gotta go." And he said, and he would throw in balls and strikes, strike one, strike. My dad said, no, strike three. And he would say to my dad, "You're a damn liar, strike." But anyway, those type of characters, and they were good fishermen and good people. They were very, very, very good. So I can still add more to it, and I'm gonna turn it over to my colleague now, my friend Jim.
Well, Captain Neal was one of a kind, needless to say. My dad used to say if the whole world was Captain Neal's, it'd be a much better place to live. But one of the reasons he always caught more fish than everybody else is that the fishermen got paid by piecemeal. And he'd come along, first thing you want to do is get you a good cook. So he'd offer the cook a few pennies more than his regular piecemeal pay to come to his boat. And once the fellas found out that that cook was on this boat, and they was raising their hand to go ahead and hire on with Captain Neal, he always got the best pilot, the best mate, best cook, by giving them part of his pay to encourage them to come and fish with him. And as a result, he had the best crews. He caught more fish than anybody else, and he more than made up for the money that he lent out to, so to speak, to these other fishermen. Lee Lasher was probably one of his favorite mates. I don't know if anybody, that rings a bell with anybody. But anyway, Neal had that bass voice like he was talking about, and I can remember Neal cutting back, and one of the chanties he used to sing that I remember was "Wine, wine, 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 holy wine." And then that was their cue to grab the net, start pulling it toward you. And then he'd start singing some of the other stuff. And one of the guys used to always talk about when it come time for the singing, they say, "All right, it's time to put a nickel in the piccolo, Captain." And so then he would start to sing and whatnot. But poker fishing's been around Fernandina for quite some time. We're not exactly sure when it all started, but the company that our family had was started in Go ahead.
What was the market for the fish?
Well, what we did was render the fish into fish meal, fish oil, and fish solubles. Some of you may know more about the fish solubles.
So cod liver oil and
Cod liver oil was approved for human consumption. It took a long time for anything to do with the pogies to be approved for human consumption. There was a strong vegetable oil market that kept it off the market. But now our company started, well, in 1911. It was a Seminole fertilizer company, and then it went broke in 1920, and it was bought on the courthouse steps, and became Nassau Fertilizer and Oil Company. Like Neal said, back in the day, there was a lot of fishing going on. There were 3 separate pokie plants up on the site up the end of North 14th Street. Not 1, not 2, but 3. There were one in Mayport, one in St. Mary's. In 1900, there were 200 pokie plants on the east coast of the United States. 100 years later, there were 2. So here's a copy of a newspaper article in the Nassau County Leader dated Friday, June the 10th, 1927. It talks about Nassau Fertilizer and Oil Company, one of the county's largest assets. And I'll leave this up here for anybody that later on wants to read it. But it talks about how big that industry was in Nassau County at that time, one of the biggest industries in Nassau County. We use purse seines to catch the fish. as opposed to our friends in the shrimping industry. I got my buddy Tommy Burbank to give you a little bit of an idea of what a purse seine looks like. I hate to get you up, old partner, but
That's all right.
What's it called?
it's called a purse seine. P-U-R-S-E.
Seine.
Seine.
It's a net, it's a net.
Yeah. Basically, it's a long rectangular net, okay? And I got it twisted enough to where we probably can't get it going with it. But just turn it upside down. It had a cork line on the top and, of course, a lead line on the bottom. And it's just a long rectangular shaped net that two purse boats, the small boats that would actually do the fishing, each one of them had half the net in it. Now in the center of the net, you probably can't tell from where you're sitting, but the webbing here is a lot thicker than on the wings. So the whole idea was once you went around to fish, you wanted to concentrate the fish in the stronger part. So that this was the middle, and these two wings, each purse boat had part of it on the boat. Now in Neil's day, you know, he's so far back, they would spot the fish either through the crow's nest, watch for birds where they went through. By the time I came along, airplanes were spotting the fish. Okay? And there's some of the fish. We hit it one more time.
Okay. Just a second. This?
All right, you can't hardly tell this,
Cool.
but that's a school of pogies right here. It appears to be a big black dot in the ocean. And I'm too close to it, I can't hardly see it. But that's the pogie boat, and then the purse boats would be on the back of the vessel. Davits would pick them up like this right here and lift them up out of the water. Each boat had half of the net in it. When the man upstairs on the airplane, he'd radio down and tell them where to go to look for that spot of fish, okay? Once they got there, they'd lower the boats down, and then when they got to pilot on the airplane would holler out, "All right, open up, open up." And the two boats would begin to spread apart. And when they did, the net would come out. And they go all the way around. Let's join together.
Okay.
They go all the way around the fish. Okay? Now, these are a sample of some of the corks that we would use. Every 6 feet, there was a series of 3 corks that were sewn together and then sewn onto the net. Not these little plastic things, but I guess we could do something. And, you know, if you start multiplying 3 of these every 6 feet on a net that's 1/4 of a mile long, that's a lot of corks. Now at the bottom, you needed something to make it sink and go to the bottom. We use these metal rings. Here again, every 6 foot, you had one of these rings. Some of the older ones that Neil used to mess with used to rust. By the time I came along, stainless steel took place. Now, we'll leave some of these out too. Anybody want to take a look at them? But when those rings would drop to the bottom, they had a rope that went through them. Every one of these had a rope that went through. And so by the time, I'm going to get you to hold on to that. They came around the fish, hit it a couple of times there to see what we can come up with. Well, that worked out good.
Fishing at night.
Right. That's the little striker boat that Neil was talking about back in his day. And these boats are circling around, basically that striker boat who thinks he's in the middle of everything. But we use, of course, the airplane. But at the bottom of the net, that purse line went through every one of these rings. So once they got around, they had what they call a tom weight, which basically was a 1,000-pound piece of lead that had some pulleys put into it. And they threw that overboard. And those pulleys had the the purse line in it. And the purse line with that weight at the bottom would start to pull it in and close that net up. So that if you turned it upside down, it looked like a purse, a woman's handbag. They had the bottom, in the case of a handbag, it was the top that was closed. In our case, it was the bottom. And then you had your fish. Then it was a matter of taking your nets and working it back into the purse boats and hardening up the fish to bail on the mothership. Here you can see,
You get ready to circle the school.
yeah, the purse boats. Now this is the net right here. And they're separating and dragging that net out of the boat to circle the fish. Hit it one more time. Well, that's getting...
That's my uncle right there, Clifford McDonald from Old Town. Right there. And I probably know some of the others I don't recognize them now, but that's Uncle Clifford McDonald.
Is there where they sing, right? This is where they sing songs.
Oh yes, oh yes.
Right.
Yeah, they're pulling the net in.
Now, this is in the old days. You can see how many people they had in the boats. They pulled it up by manpower. You see the cork line here. The rings are, this is the cork line going back in the boat. The rings were back on the other side of the boat. But look at all the people they had pulling all these. That's all fish in the middle of that net right there. Now, in the old days, like Neil said, they had a big hoop net. It was a big piece of a ring of metal. They had the net around it. And they basically scoop it down into this area, hoist it out, move it over the fish hole. The net was tied at the bottom. You pull the rope to open it up. The fish would fall in. You tie the net back up, go get another one. In my day, we came along with a pump, a fish pump. And when the two boats came alongside the mothership, they formed a triangle.
Like this.
You take that 10-inch hose and pick it up. That's a good example of it. This is the hoop net right here. Can y'all see it okay?
Mind if I'm gonna wait? I guess I'm gonna wait.
You're okay.
That's picking it up. But that's the old timey way. Use an awful lot of manpower doing that. All right? See what else
To the
we
new
got.
way. It's
Huh?
a new way. That's the new
All
way.
right? Hit it again.
Yeah.
Now, the new way, you can see the two purse boats coming alongside the mothership. You can't see it real good, but that's a 10-inch hose, or that's a 10-inch piece of pipe that is fed from a 10-inch hose that drops down in the middle of all this and starts sucking seawater. Now, there's a housing up here that the pump pumps all the water across. The fish fall on the housing and goes in the fish hole. The water goes through the housing, and that's all this ruckus out here is the water being pumped off the side of the boat right here. So that you got the fish in the fish hole without as much water that you don't really need. Here's another example of the boats forming that triangle with the mothership. Let's see, there's the fish hose right here. That fish hose had a big metal cage around the front of it to keep larger fish, if we had any in the net, from stopping it up. Believe it or not, you had very little bycatch in pogy fishing. You had some, but by volume it was almost nothing. The fishermen would pick out the food fish and take back home. But we were allowed a 2% bycatch, and we never came even close to it. The nature of the beast, pogy fish reproduce at a fantastic rate. One female is capable of giving off 250,000 eggs. Now those eggs are hatched in the ocean, similar to what shrimp are. Through the tide movements and the wind, they go up into the estuaries and they grow up. And after they begin to grow, the bigger they get, the less salinity, or the more salinity they need, so they begin to get out of the estuaries and move out into the ocean where they're caught by the fishermen. Now, that's a lot of fish that Mother Nature can take care of. Now, as the years pass by, we began to fish more than Mother Nature could put back. It wasn't a good sign. So, one of the reasons Mother Nature couldn't put as much back would be the destruction of habitat, filling in the wetlands. You start filling in the wetlands, that's less habitat for these young pogie fish to grow up. And you got your pollution factor that literally destroys wetlands. So here again, that's the growing up grounds, and it's not as much as it used to be. So the consequence is you can take a pie and cut it 3 ways and argue all day how to separate those 3 things, but overfishing, destruction of habitat, and pollution was caused a lack of fish. So the 3 pogie plants in Fernandina, 2 of them were owned by large conglomerates, so to speak. And when fishing began to, dry up a little bit, they just packed their bags in their boats, moved to a different location. We were a small independent, we had nowhere else to go, so we stayed here. We acquired the property of the other 2 pogie plants. And for a long time, people thought there was just 1 pogie plant, but there were actually 3. All right, move on to another one.
Excuse me, how far out did the boats have to go to catch the fish?
Usually within 5 miles of shore. Our dad's, we're 60 foot deep. So once you got beyond 60 feet of water, you couldn't catch them too good. Now, the pogie fish eat plankton. They swim with their mouths open and eat whatever's in the water. And it's because they reproduce at such a fantastic rate, they travel in large schools, which most people think is for protection. So the big feeder fish, or fish that most of the anglers like to go after, they eat those pogies, but they eat them on the fringes. And they can sense these nets going around them. And when they sense the net going around them, they just dive and come underneath them. And we never got a lot of food fish in our catches because of that. Now, occasionally we get a shark. I don't remember a porpoise ever. I can remember at Telford one time, we had a shark in the net, and the shark decided to come out, and that triangle we were talking about, he cleared the first boat Captain Telford was in, and scraped the side of his face.
Oh my God.
And just took the skin all with it. But to show you how things have changed, he took his shirt off, wrapped it around his head, and they kept right on going. Now, as time went on, that fish pump I was telling you about was invented, excuse me, not the fish pump, but these power blocks you see right here. What these power blocks did is this was a kind of an aluminum housing with a rubber insert, kind of like a rubber tire, that had grooves of rubber, like putting speed bumps on it. And it would grab the net and rotate around and just rotate the net back into the fish, to the purse boats. And that particular piece of equipment saved us a lot of manpower. The crews went from 26 people when Neil was on there to 16. So that's 10 less men that you needed on the boat. And Victoria's dad was the one that invented that and saved a lot of manpower and cut back on the cost of production. So her dad was very instrumental in not only pogie fishing, he owned the pogie boat at one time that we bought from him. But he was a Marine surveyor. You name it, he could speak several languages. And when fishing started opening up in South America, Central America, Mexico, he was there to help out and survey boats. And my dad used to say he was a genius, and the fishermen used to say that he had more knowledge in his brain than his brain could hold. Unfortunately, he died at a very young age, and some of the fishermen talked about, well, he just had too much knowledge in that brain and it exploded. But he was quite the character, very instrumental in our business, and needless to say, a very good friend of our families. But that device right there saved a lot of time and a lot of money. So once we got alongside, we pumped those fish on board, go back to the factory, and got them out the same way we put them in. We had a 10-inch pipe that went down into the fish hole, and we flooded the fish hole with water. Then we started to pull the water out of the boat, and of course the fish would be in with the water. It would run up on a screen that kept rotating around, the water would go through the screen, and the fish would go into the process. We had big augers that were totally enclosed and had steam shot into them. And the steam would cook the fish by the time they ran the 40 feet length of the cooker. What came out the other end was kind of a slurry, kind of a soup-looking stuff. That would fall into huge presses that were like a screw conveyor as well, but the shaft got thicker and thicker and thicker, where it would squeeze the liquid out of the fish, and what came out of the press would run through a dryer, a dehydrator. We worked on the same principle as your clothes dryer at your house. It would tumble the fish scrap around and around until it got down to about 10% moisture, and then it would be transported by screw conveyors into the warehouses, where we ran it through a hammer mill and got the fish meal, which was used quite a bit in the poultry industry, and chickens, feeding chickens. For a long time, it was used as a fertilizer back in Neil's day, the dark ages, anyway, after the Second World War, there were a lot of synthetic fertilizers that came about. 10 tins that you buy at the hardware store. Right. And they were a lot less expensive than the organic fertilizer, like a fish meal. So they did a lot of work, and fish meals are very high in protein. Protein is made up of amino acids, and it just so happened that two of the amino acids that are in fish meal, lysine and methionine, really speed the growth rate of a chicken. For a long time, people knew that if you fed chickens fish meal, they would grow faster, but they really never knew why. So they called it the unidentified growth factor. And some nutritionists at the University of Georgia did a lot of research and came up with the idea that it was these amino acids, lysine and methionine, that make them grow fast. They could take a chicken and in 4 weeks have a 4-pound chicken ready to go to the market. So most of the product that we made was sold to the poultry industry. And then the fish oil, we had a hard battle with the vegetable oil people. Most of you guys, well, at least down in my area, we called it oleo, but it was margarine that everybody used because butter was so expensive. And it was basically, vegetable oil. And in the Scandinavian countries, Northern Europe, they use fish oil in very much the same way. As a cooking oil. It was refined a little bit more. But due to the strong lobbying of the vegetable oil people, it took a long time to get fish oil or Pogy oil approved by the FDA for human consumption. Now, the fish solubles was used as well as a feed supplement. Some of you may have been to hardware stores and seen a product called fish emulsion, which is the same as the fish solubles. It just uses a different acid to stabilize it, so to speak. We use sulfuric acid. The fish emulsion uses phosphoric acid because it's got a much higher fertilizer value. Now, we continued to fish for a long time, and as this country began to get more and more prosperous, the odor that was produced from drying the fish became less and less acceptable. I can remember we had a house on the beach as a kid, and after a hurricane or two, my dad says, we got to move in town, get away from the beach. Can you imagine? And so nowadays, with the prosperity of our country, more and more people wanted to get on the beach. And so when they began to move to the beaches, the odor of something like the pogie plant became more and more unacceptable. So the state of Florida, in their wisdom, came and told us that we stunk. It only took them 50 years to find out. I'll give them credit for that. So we created what we call the terminal heater. Basically, it was a huge furnace. And the gases that were produced from drying the fish, when you bake fish in your oven, it's nothing unusual to have a little smelly, fishy odor in your kitchen. Well, you got to multiply that times, what'd you say, Neil, that the amount of fish that we could catch. The more modern boats could take 200 tons of raw fish. Back when Neil, there was a little slack on him, they about half that because the boats were a little bit smaller. But, you know, that produced a pretty good little odor. But we were able to siphon off those gases that had the odor and run them into the bottom of this furnace, for lack of a better word. And by the time they traveled to the top, it was pretty well burned up and killed the odor. But 60% of the total energy needs of our company went to buy fuel for that one piece of equipment. And in 1987, toward the end of the fishing season, that piece of equipment went on blink. So we asked the state of Florida for a variance, and we were turned down. And so we made a company decision not to start the 1988 fishing season. So the last bogies that were caught in this area was in 1987. And so that kind of ended the era, so to speak. And we ran into some problems because when you go out to St. Mary's River, if you take a left, you're in Georgia waters. If you take a right, you're in Florida waters. If you go straight, you're in federal waters, 3 miles offshore. And you had different rules and regulations depending on which way you went. And for a lot of the fishermen that weren't highly educated, the last thing they wanted to do is to take time to write down all this stuff that was asked for. They were more interested in catching the fish. So it caused a lot of problems from that point of view. Most of the fish we caught were off the coast of Georgia. We caught quite a few here. There were examples, like Neil said, where you have a net sanded down and fish would get loose and watch up on the beach. And, for a long time, it wasn't a problem because there weren't that many people here. And on Cumberland, there wasn't anybody. But eventually those fish would deteriorate, the birds would eat them, the waves would wash them back out or be eaten by other fish. And so, but the pokie fishing's been a part of this community for a long, long time. Even when we dropped down to 16 people on a boat, when you start multiplying that times 3 companies, and each company fishing anywhere from, you know, up to 5 boats apiece, that's a lot of people that are employed, and that doesn't include the people that were in the factory. So there was a lot of people that grew up in this town that worked at the pokie plant. I can remember going off to college, and my landlord wanted a bag of fish meal to put on some of his. And we used to take turns driving home, and a buddy of mine's turned, and we put a bag of fish meal in his trunk.
Oh my God.
And as he said, he remembered that trip for a long, long, long time. My my brothers and I, we all worked out there for a long time, some for shorter time, but certainly the whole time we were in high school. And my mother had a diaper pail with a little odor eater on the top. And we had to undress in the garage and run up to the shower. We weren't allowed to come in the house for those sweet smelling clothes on. But I'll open it up for any questions that anybody might have. Yes,
I have
ma'am.
a question. When they threw that 1,000-pound weight in to close the bottom of the net, how did they detach it from the net? How did they retrieve it, put it back on the boat? That's 1,000 pounds.
Well, it's 1,000 pounds, but it was attached to another rope, okay? And it would go down, and when everything was finished, it had what they call a cat head. It rolled around. And you take that rope that was attached to it and wrap around there, and they just bring it right back up.
Jim, I may have some pictures if I could. Does that show?
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I'm just curious, did anybody eat them? I mean, why didn't people eat them?
Well, first of all, they're small. This example we got here
That's
is about as
pretty
big as one you'd ever want to see.
Yeah, I know, I was.
But the taxidermist, was a little selective when he wanted to do something like that. If you gave him a real small one, he couldn't do a good job.
Yeah.
But they're small, they're very oily, and bear in mind that the oil is the fat that's in the fish.
Yeah.
So part of our process was to run the water that came out of the presses, pressing the water out of the fish through a centrifuge, similar to what dairy people do with cow's milk to get cream, which is the fat that's in the milk. So we'd run it through a centrifuge to get the oil out. And then to market that, most of it went overseas quite a time.
Yeah.
But during the Second World War, my dad said that I think it was Stokely would can pogies to send to the soldiers,
Oh.
like a sardine. They put some type of, I don't know exactly what it was, but they'd can it and they'd send it over there. So
Oh, they
it's okay for human consumption, but it doesn't taste good. It's full of and, the fact that it's full of scales, it's full of oil, doesn't taste good.
A lot of bones too.
It's a pain in the can to get the meat off of. Other than that, it's good. It's great for you.
Now, up in the northern states, they grew larger, and people did eat them. They smoked a lot of pogies up there, and the pogies had probably one of the best tasting fish rolls I've ever eaten. The fish roll from the pogies, large pogies, are very
The
good.
pickled herring.
Yeah.
Pickled herring.
Yes.
Yes.
That's the
Yeah.
No? It's
Harry's,
different?
Yes, sir.
With no pogie fishing since 1988, have the fish recovered their numbers, or does somebody else harvesting them?
That's a good question. I guess we need to get up in the airplane and go see if we can find out. No, the shrimpers did still report them. The last thing a shrimper wants to do is to drag through a school of pogies. But and the shrimpers, some of y'all probably come to Billy Burbank's to talk about shrimping. The nets that they use is totally different than what we use. Yes, sir.
did you ever experience the die-off of total, a lot of the bunker floating up under the surface as you were going out to the fishing?
Did we see them?
Dying,
Dying?
yes.
No,
Oxygen depletion.
no.
Up in the Northeast, we have a big problem with that because mostly the fish go up in the estuaries and they self-trap, and there's so many fish that there's not enough oxygen
Right.
to supply them, and you have a die-off, and that was a big problem.
Right.
And it was caused, that literally killed the population. That is the tank, the net is going through Long Island Sound and all the other estuaries. That would it killed off the striped bass, it killed off the bluefish. All of the game fish were really depleted. They've come back now since about '88, what we're talking about. But that's the only thing that's the enemy is the game fish. And now they're really on an upsurge because the Menhaden has come up and,
They got something to eat.
the cycle is now all around.
I've got a couple of things here. This is one of the
Oh, really?
net needles that we used to use, a little bit different than what the shrimpers use.
Right behind him there, that's another one of my uncles, Uncle John Galloway.
So how big were they from the cork side to the bottom? How?
60 feet.
Okay.
Now these are some of the licenses we used to have to get. This is a saltwater fishing and oystering license, number 3309, year 1935, 1936. Now, you can see they rusted a little bit, but I was able to salvage some of these if you want to take a look.
Like Jim was saying, he worked at the plant, but when they were catching a lot of fish, they had 3 plants. And each plant had, what, 4 or 5 boats each or whatever, and they'd come in deck loaded sometime. You're talking each boat had 400,000 or 500,000 fish. And they would blow the whistle and the schools would let out. I know at Peck High School, the school would let out, they go to the mill to work because they were processing all night.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a big time thing back then, and guys made money in school. And during the Second World War, the government gave my father this United States Navy as being to all persons who shall see these present readings, be it known that this certificate from the Eastern Sea Frontier is awarded to Captain Neil Frink in recognition of his patriotic services and confidential observer. This is during the Second World War. They gave him this as a conscientious observer.
What's the exact date?
The date's not, I don't know, the date's not on here, but it said during the Second World War. It didn't, I wonder why they have a date. Yes, but they, yeah, so they, and just to add a little more humor, when he said, one time they were out there and they were lost before they got all of the good communications. Back there, he called the Coast Guard and told the Coast Guard, said, this is Captain Neal, Mr. Coast Guard, and we lost. So the Coast Guard called him back, said, well, Captain Neal, give us your coordinates. And Captain Neal said, well, Mr. Coast Guard, I ain't being smart, but if I do that, I wouldn't need you.
Was the fishing seasonal? Yes. We fished in the warmer months of the year. We'd start out about this time of year, depending on whether we saw any fish or not. And we'd go up into the fall. And what made it a little bit great was that by the time we quit fishing, or stopped our pogy fishing, the white shrimp would be coming in. So a lot of the crew members that were on pogy boats could go on a shrimp boat and make pretty good money with the white shrimp. Yes, ma'am.
When your new type of fishing started up, was the old type of fishing still working? And was there any kind of interaction between the two types of fishing?
Well, needless to say, when the new type started, it was such a time saver and a money saver that it didn't take long for everybody to, switch over. If you had a choice of dragging that net all by yourself versus having a little help, it didn't take long for you to catch on. That's where Victoria's dad came in handy.
Did they still sing? Or not?
Yeah, they still sang.
I say, yeah.
Good.
I remember one of the church songs, a guy would holler out, any crew member would request a song and say, Captain Neal, take it to church. And it was a song, I grew up Catholic, so I don't know all of the Baptist songs. So, and I remember a song say, if you are a witness, let God abide. And they would pull the net in. And he'd go right on through the different verses of the song. In other church songs, they turned it into work songs too. It was peace and calm out there some days, and it was very, very touching sometimes. Stuff that they would do.
What was the Little Liza Jane song? You
We-
sang Little Liza
Little
Jane.
Liza Jane, I don't remember all of the song, But little, I got a girl in Fernandina, Little Eyes of Jane, or either I got a girl in Beaufort, North Carolina, Little Eyes of Jane, and they would go from town to town wherever the plants were. Yeah. Now I've heard, I don't know if Jim know, but I heard when years later I heard that the Russians or something had a big ship that they could drive right into a school of fish and suck them in and process them all.
They had a factory ship.
I heard that. Yes.
One thing is, somewhere along the line, before all the fishermen died out, they got a group of them together and to sing these chanties.
Yeah.
And went to Carnegie Hall in New York.
We're from North Carolina.
The Menhaden fishermen.
Yeah, from North Carolina.
Wilmington, North Carolina.
North Carolina, yes.
We should have had your father.
Yeah.
Are you in the same choir now?
He got too old, so. Yes, sir.
Can you give a little more detail that people don't understand why they were singing the chanties about
What?
grabbing the net and breaking?
Well, with that much weight, if you all pulled together, it made it a whole lot easier on everything. So it was a rhythm.
Same way as
everybody would pull together instead of one person pulling in here, one over there. If you pulled together, you could do it a lot easier.
Well, you would gather the net in as you did that.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, the same as the gentleman working on the railroad. The guys on the railroad had to work, so it sort of enthused them.
Almost all manual labor.
Yes,
sir.
Almost all. You're right.
Was it a dangerous occupation with all these wheels, pulleys, ropes and stuff?
Very dangerous.
Get their fingers pulled off and stuff.
It could be.
Did some guys die out there?
I've never seen one die. I've taken some to the hospital before.
How about you?
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to add something. I've been to the museum in Reedville, Virginia, and they still fish from Menhaden there. And there's a plant that they make omega protein, which is, if you take an omega supplement, that's in those, and also in dog food.
Right.
The omega protein. So you are eating
There you
it.
go. Well, we fed fish meal to about any kind of animal you can think of, including alligators. Yes.
So were these day trips? I mean, you went out in the morning and.
Most of them were day trips. Now, as the new way came about, the age of refrigeration, we used to take water and cool it and just run it over the fish to cool water. And it would help preserve the fish where you could stay an extra day if you want. It just all depends.
We went to the factory boats, when they went out to the big boat, a lot of small boats, they go fishing and they carry all the fish back into the big boat. And they can stay out for months.
Well, those were some of your foreign companies that came in.
Right.
They had the factory on the ship itself, so they could produce the final product on the boat.
I think it's.
Yes, sir.
One more question?
When was the dam and where was the dam across Egan's to the Pogy plant?
I don't remember, well, I guess the dam you're talking about. When I was a kid, 14th Street Bridge was not there.
Right.
They had two culverts that went across the creek that allowed water to get into, allowed water to get out of that whole area off of Atlantic Avenue. Now, they would let the water out, but they wouldn't let the water in. And the people that owned some of that property along Egan's Creek, as it made the bend to come back to Atlantic Avenue, thought that if they could get a bridge made there and take those culverts out and flood that area, they'd have a bunch of waterfront property. But what happened was too much water came small water. And if you go over the 14th Street Bridge and look back toward the ocean, you can see a handful of little islands. It was all high and dry at one time, but when they put the 14th Bridge, when we were kids, they called it the Bridge to Nowhere. Because the only place it went was the back entrance of the fort and, of course, to the Menhaden factory.
Thank you.
It's time.
Thank you.
Thank you all for showing up. Thank you.